This video is a fundamental theorem of algebra. So the objective for this video is that you can write polynomial functions given the zeros. So we're so used to solving for the zeros, solving for the x-intercepts, factoring to find them, using any method that we've learned so far. But with the fundamental theorem of algebra, we are working backwards. We're doing the opposite. So right now, what we know is we know that our zeros are -2, 2, and 4. So it says write the simplest polynomial functions with these zeros. So we know our zeros are -2, 2, and 4. Well, remember, zeros is also x-intercepts. Okay? So if I know my x-intercepts are -2, 2, and 4, I know x equals -2, x equals +2, and x equals +4. I'm going to work backwards. What I mean from that is I'm going to get my numbers on the same side as the x. So to do that, I add 2 here, I add 2 there. I get x plus 2. Well, look, there's a factor. From here, I need to subtract 2 on the second one. I get x minus 2. There's a second factor. On this last one, I need to subtract 4 from both sides. I get x minus 4. There's a third factor. So what I'm going to do is I am going to first multiply these first two terms right here. So to do that, I like to do the box method. If you FOIL, that's fine. So I get x plus 2 and x minus 2. So x times x is x squared. X times -2 is a -2x. 2 times x is +2x. 2 times -2 is a -4. So from here, I combine my like terms, and I get x squared. These x's cancel out, minus 4. So this part right here equals x squared minus 4. Now what I need to do is I need to bring down this x minus 4, and I need to multiply it by that in order to get my equation. Okay, so from here, again, I'm going to do the box method to multiply. So I get x squared minus 4, x minus 4. So x squared times x is x cubed. X squared times -4 is a -4x. -4 times x is a -4x. Oh, this one should have been -4x squared. I know some of you are like, you forgot it. I know. I'm bad about that. And -4 times -4 is a +16. So from here, I combine my like terms. So I get x squared, or x cubed. So sorry. I'm really bad about my signs. Let me fix that. So I get x cubed minus 4x squared minus 4x plus 16. And it said write a function. So to make it a function, I'm going to put f of x in front of it. You can use y, you can use f of a, f of b, whatever you want, as long as it's a function. And there we go. So if I were to factor x cubed minus 4x squared plus 4x plus 16, or minus 4x plus 16, I would get -2, 2, and 4 as my zeros. Okay, so let's do another one. Example 2, same thing, but now my zeros are -3, 1/2, and 1. And I know some of you are like, oh, this has a fraction. I'm not going to touch it, but I'm going to show you how we get rid of that fraction. So what we do, again, we have x equals -3, x equals a 1/2, and x equals 1. So from here, I add 3 to both sides to get my first factor. I get x plus 3. The second one, I'm going to multiply by 2 first. Multiply by 2. I get 2x equals 1. Then I subtract 1. And I get 2x minus 1. And now I no longer have a fraction. And then from here, I subtract 1 from my third one, and I get x minus 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply these together. So, oh, didn't change colors. I'm going to take these first two and multiply them. So again, I do the box method. I get x plus 3, 2x minus 1. So x times 2x is 2x squared. X times a -1 is a -1x. 2x times 3 is 6x. 3 times negative 1 is a negative 3. I combine my like terms. So when I do that, I get 2x squared. 6x minus 1x would give me a positive 5x minus 3. So I have this. Now I have to make sure that I bring down my third factor and I multiply those together. So now I have a trinomial times a binomial. So I'm going to do a 3 by 2. So let's do 1, 2, and there we go. So I get 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. I get x minus 1. And now I multiply. 2x squared times x is 2x cubed. 2x times a negative 1 is a negative 2x squared. 5x times x is 5x squared. 5x times a negative 1 is a negative 5x. Negative 3 times x is a negative 3x. And negative 3 times a negative 1 is a positive 3. Again, I combine my like terms. So let's see, I have 2x cubed. So I use that one. My 5x squared and negative 2x squared combine, and I get a positive 3x squared. Negative 3x minus 5x is a negative 8x plus 3. To make it a function, I put f of x or y in front of it. And there's that. So again, if I were to factor that, I would get what I started with. Looking at example 3, I now have 3 and I have 1 minus I. Well, remember back to quadratics, and anytime we did the quadratic formula or we dealt with i's and we took a square root, well, remember we always had a plus or minus, and that's how we got an I, because we took the square root of a negative number. So right now I just have 1 minus I, but what I have to remember is i's come in pairs. They don't like being lonely. They have to come in pairs. So if I have 1 minus I as a factor, I also have 1 plus I as a factor. Okay, so when I solve this, okay, I have x equals 3. I have x equals 1 minus I. I have x equals 1 plus I. Again, i's come in pairs. They always have to come in pairs, so therefore I leave them as a pair. So from here, I need to solve for x. So from here, I subtract 3, I get x minus 3. There's my first pair. Okay, from here, I'm going to go ahead and do them at the same time. So I subtract a 1 and I add an I. Subtract a 1, add an I. So I get x equals, not x equals, I'm sorry, x, because we're moving them to the same side, minus 1 plus I. There's that factor. Here I subtract a 1, subtract an I, subtract a 1, subtract an I. I get x minus 1 minus I. So for this particular question, just because I have i's and some stuff's going to eliminate, I'm going to do these first. So I have a trinomial times a trinomial, but they have i's in them and x's, so let's try not to get confused. So I have x minus 1 plus I. I have x minus 1 minus I. And we're going to multiply. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is a negative 1x. X times a negative I is a negative ix, or a negative xi. Let's do xi. Okay, that way we keep the imaginary at the end. So negative xi. Then I have negative 1 times x, negative 1x. Negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. Negative 1 times a negative I is a positive I. Okay, from here we have I times x, which is a positive ix. I have I times a negative 1, which is a negative 1i, or a negative I. I have I times a negative I get a negative I squared. But remember, I squared equals negative 1, and there's a 1 right here. So I get negative 1 times a negative 1, which turns out to be a positive 1. So this is where we have to be careful and make sure we look for like terms. So if I look for an x squared, that's the only x squared I have. So I have x So I'm done with that term. Let's go with a -1x, -1x. I don't see any others without any i's. Gives me a -2. Oops. Sorry, Siri, I don't need you. Gives me a -2. My marker's not wanting to work. Gives me a -2x. I'm done with that one. I'm done with that one. If I look here, I said to do it one way and then I mixed it up on us. Right here, this is an ix. I should have did a plus an xi. If I do that, this and this are alike right here. And they cancel each other out, so I don't have to worry about that. That's nice. Awesome. If I look at this negative I and this positive I, they cancel each other out. I'm left with a 1 and a positive 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So I got this trinomial. After all that work, I don't have any i's, which is awesome. Okay, so I get that trinomial, and I need to bring down this binomial right there, x minus 3. So now I'm going to multiply those out. So I have a binomial times a trinomial. Oops, I'm making my box wrong. Let's see. Let me retry that. There we go. So I get x minus 3. I get x squared minus 2x plus 2. So here we go. X times x squared is x cubed. X times a -2x is a -2x squared. X times 2 is 2x. -3 times x squared is a -3x squared. -3 times a -2x is a positive 6x. -3 times a positive 2 is a positive -6. And I combine like terms. So I get x cubed minus 5x squared plus 8x minus 6. To make it a function, I put a y out in front. So one thing that we should notice from this example and example 2 and example 3, I started with 3 factors. My answer, my function, has an x cubed. If I go back, I had 3 factors. 1, 2, 3. Again, my function was cubed. The first example, I had 3 factors. My function was cubed. So depending how many zeros you have, that means your exponent should also be the same. So if I had 4 zeros, I would expect to have an x to the 4th power for my final function. Looking at example number 4, I have x equals 0, x equals 2/3, x equals 3. Well, x equals 0 is just going to stay 0. If I try to move over a 0, it's going to be x plus or minus 0. So this just turns out to be x. So there's the first factor. This one I'm going to multiply by 3 first. I get 3x equals 2. I subtract the 2. I get 3x minus 2. Not bad. Here I subtract 3, I get x minus 3. I'm going to go ahead and multiply x times 3x plus 2, not plus 2, 3x minus 2. Because I don't need to do the box, I can just distribute. So that gives me a 3x squared. This right here gives me a -2x. And so I can take this and multiply it by this third factor, x minus 3. Again, I have 3 factors, so in the end, I should get an x cubed. If I had 4 factors, I'd get an x to the 4th. 5 factors, x to the 5th. If I had 2 factors, I'd get an x squared, which is fine. So now I'm going to be multiplying 3x squared minus 2x times x minus 3. So I get the box for that. It's a 2 by 2. So I get 3x squared minus 2x, x minus 3. So 3x squared times x is 3x cubed. 3x squared times a -3 is a -9x squared. -2x times x is a -2x squared, and a -2x times a -3 is a positive 6x. So then I combine my like terms, so I have 3x cubed negative 2x squared minus 9x squared, I get a negative 11x squared, and then plus 6x. And my function, I'm going to use y this time. Again, y, f of x, they mean the same thing. So there is my equation. And again, if I were to factor this, my zeros would be 0, 2/3, and 3. Okay, last question. So we have to actually read this and understand what it's asking. So what is the degree of the simplest polynomial function with integer coefficients that has 1 plus I, radical 2, and negative 3 is zeros? It's not wanting me to solve it. All it wants to know is what is the degree. Well, remember, if I have 1 plus I have to have its pair, which is 1 minus I. Okay, if I have the square root of 2, I have to have its pair, that's positive square root of 2. I have to have negative square root of 2. And then I just have negative 3, and that doesn't have a pair with it. Again, i's and radicals come in pairs. So if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 terms, that means in the end, I will have a 5th degree polynomial. Oh, I can't spell either. Okay, a 5th degree polynomial. Okay, based on how many zeros you have, that tells you how many or what degree your polynomial will be. So again, if I just have one term, I have an x to the first. If I have 2 zeros, I have an x squared. If I have 3 zeros, like all the examples we did before, I have an x cubed. In this case, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, because i's come in pairs, radicals come in pairs, it gave me a 5th degree polynomial. So this is the video for the fundamental theorem of algebra. So hopefully you can write polynomial functions given the zeros. All you got to do is work backwards.